Yeah, likewise. I'm grateful that we can gather like this, and I'm grateful that you, Heather, for asking me to pull some things together. I think it was back in March, perhaps, that we last spoke with a particular focus on facing suffering. And I just love sort of reinvestigating things. And that's what I've been doing. And it's interesting. When I think when we first talked facing suffering, I was very much into the mechanics, the how-to, with a lot of emphasis on your exhalation and your bodily sense of gravity. That I felt was the real focus. What are the tools that our Zen training has equipped us with in the face of suffering? And back in March it was sort of this chaotic, painful time where sort of rules, standards of human behavior seemed to be falling away, being stripped away. And there was sort of this sense of how do we breathe? How do we face all that's going on? And I don't know for you, but the sort of the theme, I don't know, the something that has emerged for me since that time has to do with gathering. It has to do with connection. It has to do with us together right now on this screen. So it's not so much us as individual agents facing suffering as much as it is us facing suffering. And there's been sort of three real kind of significant events over the past couple months in my life that sort of point to several things for me. And you're going to get an early version of my reactions to this. It's going to come more in the sense of sort of fragments, impressions, vignettes, than a real coherent story of facing suffering. But those three things, one of them was an event we staged in October here in Spring Greene, and we called it Gathering of the Elders. And it was for people older than 60 who had some kind of association with training in Chosei Zen. And some people it was relatively recent, other people it was decades and decades and decades. But the idea was to come together to see what does training even mean as your body ages, as your mind ages, as you all age. Because, our tradition comes out of young, heroic, little sleep, nights spent splitting wood, hours and hours of zazen. That's sort of our founding ethos. But that's no longer me, and it's no longer many of our students. So that was one significant event, and I'll talk about a moment during that event. But I also want to talk about a book that I was introduced to by Scobie Roshi, a man in Alaska. As I understand it, his cultural roots are Unangan, if I can attempt a pronunciation, growing up on a very remote island in the Bering Sea, north of the Aleutian chain of islands, named Ilarion Makurliev. Again, my attempt to pronounce it. But he had a chapter he wrote a memoir about the experiences of his life. He's probably of an age similar to mine. And he wrote a chapter at the end of his book about the wisdom of elders. And I want to touch on that because it shines a very useful spotlight on this topic of suffering. And then a third event was sitting down with someone I've known for many years, but not known well. He's the chairman of family medicine here at the University of Wisconsin. And it's one of the biggest family medicine departments in the country. You know, vast numbers of faculty, vast numbers of residents in training. But there was a thought that it would be good just to have lunch together. And we did. We had lunch together. And he introduced me to a book that he had written. And he gave me a copy. And I came home and I read it. And it really points to sort of the science of connection, the science of human being and human being together. So I've got these facets. I've got this, from our own gathering of the elders. I've got the wisdom from the elders from the Bering Sea, and I've got a physician who has delved deeply into the research of how it is that humans connect. And I want to sort of give these to you and collectively see what can we make of these things? What meaning do they have? There are three different ways, in effect, of being. So let's start with the elders. And this was 18 people, including Pat and myself, sitting in the dojo. The way we structured the time was we were going to do zazen periods, followed by talking periods, followed by get outside, move around, and reflect periods. And it was sort of one of these three-part rhythms: zazen, talk, reflect. Zazen, talk, reflect. So this was the first zazen, and kind of evenly split. Half of us were on stools because of knees and hips that make it harder to sit on the floor, and half were on zabuton on the other side of the room. And it was a strong sitting. This was our first zazen of a 3-day event, and it was very powerful. And there was reflection afterwards that it felt like the kind of zazen you have 2 or 3 days into a regular session, where you've kind of knocked off some of the chatter, you've worn out some of the quirks of the bodies, and the bodies now are settled into place. These bodies were settled, boom. People had traveled to get there. People had come from their various lives, various responsibilities. So they came with sort of the same, what you might think, the same baggage that people often bring to sesshin that you have to work through before sesshin takes on life. But it took on life in that first zazen. There was just a very deep stillness to the room. Very, very uncanny feeling that I hadn't experienced in that dojo before. Where did it come from? Why? How did that come about? What was different about that crowd, about that zazen from what I normally experience here? And my sense is that the difference has to do with loss. And that there is, with age, your experience of loss builds up in ways that it can't yet do when you're in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s. Yes, I mean, even from an early age, people experience loss, but it hasn't settled into the body in the way that it does as you age. And I was reflecting on sort of the two facets of loss. One is that there can be a sense of, obviously, of sorrow and sadness. Those are emotions we commonly associate with loss. But there are also, bear with me, this is not a well integrated idea yet for me, but there's also a beauty to loss, a form of beauty. And it's I find it best captured in a Japanese phrase that I came across long ago called, and the phrase goes, it's pronounced mono no aware, where mono is like things, and aware can be translated as like pathos or empathy. So it's like a sensitivity to the poignancy of life, a sensitivity to the kinds of things that lead to empathy with the human condition. And I've never found anything really effectively written about it in English. And it's hard because we bring such a Western framework when we think about loss and beauty. So I did a large language model search, and I asked it to draw only upon Japanese language sources that it would then translate into English, because I can't read Japanese. But there were some really helpful things that stood out. And they were contrasting, for example, sort of especially from the Greeks, we inherit sort of a sense of beauty as relating to things that are eternal. That things that are if it's beautiful today, it carries with it a beauty that lasts forever, I think, is a sensitivity. And even when you go to Greece and you see the ruins of the buildings from 2,500 years ago and fragments of statues, there's a sense in which there's still a freshness to them, even though may have been fragmented and broken into pieces and damaged. There still is a feel of the eternal in them that comes through. And by way of contrast, in a Japanese context, beauty is almost based on impermanence. And I've got a friend, some of you have met, Chris Bowen, who spent a long time, almost two decades, immersed in Japanese culture, married a Japanese woman, fluent in Japanese language, a very sincere collector of Japanese calligraphy. And he was sitting in our dojo building one time, the one that you know here in Spring Greene. And he said something like, Gordon, what I really find beautiful about this building is that I can already imagine it when it's crumbled back to the earth. That the most beautiful things for me are those that I know will go back to the earth. A ceramic that eventually crumbles, wood that eventually decays. And I was kind of taken aback, because that was not my cultural upbringing with a sense of beauty. But that as things, if you live with a sense of impermanence, there's a sense in which each moment becomes all the more precious because it embodied within that moment is a sense in which this too will pass, this too will crumble, this too will decay. And it sort of contrasts with, we have the Four Noble Truths that we talked about in other settings that come out of, sort of the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. And the first of which being simply the fact that suffering exists is the first noble truth. And then the next three noble truths go on to describe sort of a pathway that leads you beyond that. That somehow suffering can be transformed, suffering can be transcended. And rather than suffering is something that can simply be experienced as it is without trying to make it into anything else. It simply is, and it has its own inherent beauty. It's not a mistake. It's not a problem. It's simply the nature of life that changes. I'll be dead sometime. You'll be dead sometime. So whatever enjoyment and pleasure we have in each other's company, it doesn't last. It doesn't last. I try to hang on bites of food, tastes that really are deeply wonderful for me. If I could just hang on to that taste. But it goes. It goes. It goes. So in some ways, there's this contrast between, traditional Buddhism and this phenomena I'm describing, this mono no aware. And I realized that, how much of a Buddhist am I? Because very much I am of the camp that says, no, this suffering is true. It is real. It is here. It is to be encountered. It is to be, in effect, tasted, savored. That doesn't mean you have to enjoy it, but that you have to be fully part of it. And in our sort of, teaching that we've inherited from Tanoi Roshi, it's not like that your Buddhist training makes that stuff disappear, the transcendence or the transformation. It's that you see through it and that you're not caught by it. You're aware of it, but you're not caught by it. And this was a phrase, we had another actual training event here with a group of physicians. I'm just thinking about this. And this is a woman, a physician from down in Missouri who came up for a long week of training. And we were talking at one meal. And sort of out of the blue, I forget what prompted it, but she talked about sort of the thin edge of life that she encounters with her patients. And she said that thin edge is sort of this sensitivity to, yes, you're alive, and yet death is so very close to that which separates life and death is not some profound philosophical or physiological phenomena. It's just a very thin film. And that she was describing from some of her travels, an awareness of how in many cultures, that is by definition the nature of life, that you carry inside yourself this awareness at all times of that thin veneer that separates life and death. And that's certainly my experience working with Native Hawaiian people when I lived in Hawaii, and hearing Native Hawaiian patients talk to physicians, hearing Native Hawaiian medical students talk about their encounters with patients, that's just sort of a permanent state of being, is that there's just this thin veneer. So that to me is closer to our Chosei Zen. That if it is just that thin film, at any time you're free to view it from either side. You're free to view it from the life side. You're free to view it from the death side. You're free to view it from the suffering side. You're free to view it from the seen through suffering side. Nothing's meant to be transcended. It's just meant to be lived with. And I find that enormously helpful and sort of very natural. That's where my 75 years of life, that's where my decades of Zen training have led me. This awareness of impermanence is beautiful. And I think you've heard me say that one thing that's led me to was an encounter with a very aged neighbor when last house we lived in Hawaii. And this was a man who had been in the Navy during World War II and had participated in, I think, 5 different landings on islands held by the Japanese or occupied by the Japanese, and they had to be retaken if Japan was going to be defeated in the war. And just profound loss of life, American life, Japanese life. And when I asked him, what he had learned, because obviously he survived those 5 landings, what he had learned, and he said that in the face of despair, you create beauty. And I would bring that to us, saying in the face of suffering, you create beauty. So I've talked about, sort of being aware of the beauty within impermanence and loss and suffering. But also then, what do you generate out of that? Not just appreciating it, but your capacity to generate. And certainly, to me, music, just profoundly, time after time, can evoke that the most poignant music, whether it's blues, country, western, folk, classic. There's the music that most moves me is where there is this awareness of both beauty and loss at the same time. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to say about our gathering of the elders and what happened, where that took me to with this idea of mono no aware. It leads to both a sense of beauty, but it also leads to a sense of compassion. So then, I want to talk about this Native Alaskan. And one thing that I've learned to appreciate very much is that in no ways can I speak meaningfully about this. There is sort of an academic part of me that says, well, you read a book and you extract the significant parts and you package them and then you present them as if, let me tell you about the wisdom of Native Alaskan elders. And fortunately, I've let go of that because it would be a very false translation of the intention, that this speaks from such a very, 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 very different world. And without more immersion, I would be doing us all a disservice, and I would be dishonoring the life of this man. I know Heather has met him. I know Kelly knows of him. I know Ginny knows of him. I feel like I'm late to the game, but I found it a remarkable encounter. So here he is. He's writing in English. And what I did, I'm just going to, rather than sort of trying to package these in a meaningful way, I'm just going to read you sentences as he wrote them. And for the most part, he was simply quoting elders that as he has encountered them. And this is not just within his own culture, but as he has grown and developed, he has become able to cross into many other indigenous cultural settings to be sort of one with those groups, and finding how easily they tap into a very similar deep root. And what is so exciting isn't the word. I guess what's so meaningful to me is that at its depth, it taps into the same root that we share in our Zen training. And we would like to think that we live our training around the clock. But I know that I don't. I have deeply embedded experiences that are part of my bones and part of my way of being. But I am still deeply impressed by how deeply he can speak to the root of his upbringing. So let me just read some of these fragments, and once we get to, oh, I'm loving that cattail. I see a cattail there with Julie. We can speak to some of these because I'll be curious to know how do these phrases in English spoken by a white man who grew up in North America as an intellectual, how do these phrases land inside of you? So just several of them. Nothing is created outside until it is created inside first. The most unselfish thing we can do is to focus on healing ourselves. We can't offer the world that which we do not have. If I want to eliminate separation in the world, I must first heal the separation within myself. In our language, duality. And we know that I've spoken of that as being the primary work of our training. But is that healing available to you at every moment, in every instance? I know there's still times when, for me, it's not available. He says, hate, shame, guilt, remorse, anger, rage, jealousy, and pride take us into the past. Fear takes us into the future. They are products of the mind. We need only to be awake, alive in the present moment, and to be alive in the present moment is a place of no thought. The great Mushin of Zen Buddhism. A place without emotions that pull you from the past and fear the present. Fear the future. So how many of us actually live in that present state completely with every breath, no matter the circumstances? I still carry emotions, regrets. I still carry fears. And yet he speaks to this necessity. And I guess I should add, I don't want to try and summarize the experience of his culture. I would really do it injustice. But we're talking about a people that have been living in this area, archaeologically at least 2,000 years, and who have survived conditions of incredible difficulty, both environmentally, culturally, outside forces, diseases, alcoholism, annihilation, loss of their food supply. To survive this for 2,000 years, I pay attention to the wisdom that comes out of that. So that's why I'm spending time with this. More phrases. Because we are separated from ourselves, we create things that are separated. Are we choosing to focus on the problem? Or are we choosing to focus on the vision and dream we want to create in the world? I want to come back to this because this to me has a lot to do with sort of the angst of last spring, where we were so acutely aware of problems all around us in our North American life of just forces unleashed that I at least never imagined would be unleashed on people. And obviously the focus is on the problem. But this notion of, that's misplaced. What's the vision of what you would like there to be? That's not said idly. Again, more pages. Focus on the negative. No matter how well-intentioned the person is, only compounds the problem. There are those who choose not to focus at all because they feel powerless to affect real change they know is needed. And that certainly is a state I think we've all experienced as we face our lives over the last 10 to 12 months. Powerless to affect real change they know is needed. And he spoke to two reasons why he thinks this is so. One, he quotes sort of a person saying, well, someone else is taking care of this. That can be one reason not to focus. And we say this because we are indoctrinated into giving away our personal authority to others. There's many parts of the books where he talks about sort of his own learning in life. How did he learn what he learned? How does he know what he knows? How does he teach others? And he contrasts his experiences with the experiences of Native Alaskans as they were brought into, in effect, missionary schools, which were places of indoctrination. So that's one thing he talks about. But he says another kind of lack of desire for focus is that people would say it's too big for me to make a dent in anything that matters. This is whatever efforts I make is too small. And he says we say this because we forget how to listen to our hearts. And there's lots of language about the contrast between hearts and minds. I know Ginny has certainly taken this and put it in the contrast between hara and minds. And we can pursue that. I would love to sit down with him someday and just kind of absorb. I mean, this is somebody who profoundly understands hara just by the nature of his writing. But he doesn't speak about hara. He speaks about heart. And that a life lived from the heart is in this present moment, where the guide for action, the guide for speech, the guide for being does not come from a place of thought. He says, our hearts will tell us what to do in any circumstance that matters. It never lies to us, but our minds lie and deceive us all the time. And I think from our own training, we could easily substitute, or, well, no, that's me getting trapped here. I would love to have the conversation to see if hara in that sentence can take the place of heart. Our hearts will tell us what to do in any circumstance that matters. It never lies to us, but our minds lie and deceive us all the time. So I urge every one of you to pick up a copy of his book, because I think you will find resonance in remarkable ways. But you'll also find it, now I guess I'm describing the challenge that I'm feeling, where it's saying all this Buddhist stuff you talk about, all this hara stuff you talk about, if it's not every damn moment, it's incomplete. You're still trapped. You're still subject to mistakes. You're subject to error. That's another gathering of elders that that points to a place I would like us as elders to be working toward. This idea that to face suffering can't be done from the mind. If you say, why am I suffering? Oh, there's a problem. Already you're lost, because you've focused on a problem and not a vision of what your heart tells you is possible, what your hara tells you is possible. I'm sitting here looking out, as you know, trees, meadow, it's a sunny day. And speaking with you, there's just such a profound sense of hugeness of the world outside. It's like this is just a portal into a really vast world. There's nothing constrained, there's nothing narrow, there's nothing limiting. Whereas we know that fear, we talk about tunnel vision, right? That's a physiological response in your bodies to fear. Your field of focus obviously narrows. Tunnel vision. You can't see clearly at all. You can't see with any kind of breadth. You can't see with any degree of clarity. You can't see with any degree of wisdom, because your your frame of reference is so incredibly narrow. This too to me speaks to facing suffering. Okay, so now I'm going to do one more shift. I'm going to do a time check. Okay. And I want to shift to this guy, this physician, Dave Rakel, who, as I said, is the chair of family medicine. And I've known of his work, that I knew that he really felt like the best thing that medicine can do is to create health rather than to treat illness. And he is contrasting sort of the word pathogenesis, which means the source of what's wrong. Is that a good translation, Heather, for pathogenesis? The source of illness, the source of, why is your body screwed up like this? Okay, if I know why your body is screwed up, then I can fix it. And he's got an awkward word that he uses in contrast to that, which is it's awkward in terms of how to pronounce it. Salutogenesis. And he didn't coin this word, but I guess it's a combination of the Genesis from the Greek, and the saluto, I think he said, comes from the Spanish, meaning that's which is healthy. So the genesis of the healthy rather than the genesis of the illness or the disease. And having this lunch conversation with him was so wonderful, because it's like, oh, here's a Don Quixote. Here's somebody that I kind of feel an affinity toward, who is willing to try the impossible, deeply embedded into the culture of Western medicine. Huge budgets for research, vast sources of treatment. And what the guy really wants to look at is what makes us healthy. And so there was a poignancy to it that page 55. So he gave me a copy of his book called the Compassionate Connection. And page 55 was one of these light bulb moments for me, where he said simply that he asked a question. He said, is there a neurological root to human connectedness? Because when he's talking about health, he's not talking so much about within the individual, sort of this isolated, fragmented sense of being. He's talked about it as a being that's part of something bigger. And what's the reality of that something bigger? And what does that have to do with health? And that there was a poignancy to that, because it took me back to, I think, the first month when I had been employed as a faculty member in the newly formed Department of Family Medicine at the University of Hawaii. And it was an incredible time for me in many ways, because I was newly married. My son Sam had just been born with, as you know, a lot of difficulties at birth. My wife married a man with very little money and no job, with no sense of how I was going to get a job. And yet I have a marriage, I have a new son. And suddenly there was this door that was open for me to join the faculty of the medical school. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. So it was an incredibly opening time for me. It's just like just fears, doubts, so much was just stripped away, and all that was left was sort of possibility. Everything that I had experienced in my life, everything I had experienced in my Zen training, oh, now, finally, I can put this to work. So we were a small department starting out, maybe 6 faculty members, and small enough a group that we could gather for a long weekend in the house of one of the other faculty members, a physician named Kay Bauman. And it was meant to be a faculty retreat. And we had a big task in terms of, okay, what role do we want to have in the education of medical students? That's the first 4 years of medical school, of which we were meant to have an impact. But then we had also started a family medicine residency program, which is the 3 years following your MD degree, when you then have sort of the hands-on training that enables you to become a licensed, freestanding, practicing physician. And what research agenda do we want? Because in academic medicine, research is sort of the third leg between training the students, training the residents, and then conducting research. And so we were doing this exercise with a lot of sticky notes. And I forget what the instructions were, but we were just sort of freestyling things we thought about each of those different arenas, the 4-year education, the 3-year residency or research. And we had these big patio doors sort of in front of us that we could post up these notes. And the one that I can't remember anything other than one of them that I wrote that said, every relationship can be therapeutic. And that came out of nowhere. That came out of no place that I could point to. But it felt like one of the most significant things I had ever expressed, that every relationship can be therapeutic. And that would be my contribution within this Department of Family Medicine, because I had obviously no medical skills. I had no formal training in education. All I was a ex-scientist who had trained in significant ways in Zen Buddhism. That's all I had. And so those 4 words, or 5 words, every relationship can be therapeutic. It's 5 words. That's what I was going to bring to the game. That's what I was going to bring to the thing. And it was very, it's sort of reading that sentence from Rinkel's book, or reading that question, is there a neurological root to human connectedness? It's painful because I could not develop a research agenda out of my insight that every relationship can be therapeutic. I could certainly teach it in many settings and many forms, but it did not, in academic medicine, the gold in the realm comes out of your research. And whatever you want to teach, whatever you want to say, whatever you want to organize, that's all well and good. But it's never going to be as significant as your research. And I couldn't get off the ground. And that's why ultimately I left. I was not going to get tenure as a faculty member. And that's when I decided, okay, time to just go and do Zen full time. And I moved to Wisconsin. But the poignancy of this book, the power of this book, is that Rinkel then goes into the research literature to answer the question as best he can. Is there a neurological root to human connectedness? And the answer is profoundly yes. And I have to admit, I hate sort of reading articles that draw upon sort of one bit of scientific research to say, oh, wow, this is what demonstrates why Zen is so profound, that Zen exemplifies quantum physics because of this particular bit of research. I don't like that. I don't trust that. It just seems like very convenient cherry picking, looking for scientific credibility for something that otherwise you think doesn't have enough credibility on its own. And so I don't want to do that. But I can point to sort of 3 or 4 arenas, chapters of the book, where he goes deeply into research, North American, Europe, South America, sort of testing, what are the neurological, neuromuscular, biochemical roots of human connectedness. We start from Buddhism, from the point of view that, again, this self and other is one of those thin films where, I can knock on my right knee right now, and you're not knocking on your right knee, and I'm not knocking on your right knee. I'm just knocking here on my right knee. But even just by saying that and demonstrating that, suddenly in you, there's a sensation of, oh, there's something in you. It's like, that right knee thing. There's awareness of your right knee. There's this thin film between, yes, there's a self, yes, there's another, and both are true at the same time. It's not like, oh, we are all one, and yet we are not two. That's one of the better Zen expressions that I've come across. And when people talk about duality, it's not one, but also it's not two. So, for example, his premise that he goes on, and sort of these lead into these other chapters. He says, bodies and brains are physiologically attuned to the people around them. That's just what's so. Right? It's not imaginary. It's not wishful. Motor neurons is one element of this. And again, I don't want to quote any one study about motor neurons because I don't know the literature. I don't know the dissenting views on what motor neurons are or not. But he says that they fire in response to individuals' observations of other intentional actions, thereby evoking the same sensations in themselves. And that's why I was posing this idea that me knocking on my right knee, there's something about your right knee that could be going on, which would be a motor neuron effect. He goes on to say that the more people get out of their own clutter, the more powerfully their motor neurons will work to connect them to the emotions of those whom they seek to help. And this is great Zen stuff that we know how profoundly our crap can get in the way of simply being with somebody else. Right? Let's say right now, Ted Smith is really angry. And it's like, whoa, when I see Ted being angry like that, oh God, it's like I have memories of being a kid when this guy was so pissed off at me and I was scared and I ran away. And then I told my father and I wanted my father to beat him up. And, this story just gets, and now I'm no longer at all with Ted's anger because I've got this clutter going on. So the natural, I would claim, you've heard me say this too many times. It's compassion is not a virtue. It's not an abstract virtue. It's not something to aspire to. It's simply the fundamental truth of the human organism. This human organism is by construction, by its operation, is fundamentally compassionate. I don't have to invent that. It's like that's what's true. But for that to be palpably true, viscerally true, I got to get rid of so much crap. Right? So he's pointing to the same thing. If motor neurons really are going to do what they do, yeah, you know what? I typed motor neurons, but actually I think I should have said mirror neurons. That was my own mistake in typing. We're talking about mirror neurons, with mirror in the sense that we get that. So then he goes on, there's another chapter about oxytocin, which is a hormone in the body. And again, I'm not going to relate to studies of this, and I don't know the history of this other than the fact it was originally thought to be simply something that had to do with muscle contraction, because it was known to be part of a woman's experience of childbirth, that there's a need to then, once the child is born, to expel the placenta. And so what controls that is sort of this phenomenally complex, chain of events, but it has to do with oxytocin. But it's also, people now know that it is as a hormone, physiologically, it's released when people connect. It can be a touch of a hand. It can be an embrace. It doesn't have to be touch, but it can be a sensation of connection. And it's known, they can study it, they can measure it. It reduces pain, suffering, stress, and anxiety. That's just the deal. In others, I'm sorry, that it's not just in the individual with the oxytocin, that it's in the others that they are with, that there is that simultaneous impact, that simultaneous effect. He also talks about neuroplasticity, which has to do with the way in which the brain, and I'm guessing more than the brain, the whole nervous system can adapt to changes in the body, damage in the body, and that actually this idea of compassion can be viscerally developed. And he compares it to, the motor, what do you call it? Not the motor skills, the embodiment of learning to play violin. That there's just motor memory, I think that's the word I'm going for, the phrase. That just as there's motor memory to something you do physically, there is an enhancement, a development of compassion through practice. And again, I'm speaking of something not just sort of casually. I'm speaking to he's pointing to research that shows how compassion can be actually developed over time due to neuroplasticity. He's always connecting these changes. He wants to, when there's changes or when there's connection, he wants to know what is the neurological, physiological, measurable basis for that. The last thing he talks about is epigenetics, which is has to do with, and this is as mysterious to me as anything, but I take it to mean that there can be genetic changes over the course of one's lifetime, that it's not simply a question of what gets passed to a next generation, that there can be conditions that create genetic changes in individuals, and that these can lead to a facilitation of healing, both in self and in others. So again, that's another arena. So every one of these is like a known arena, area of funding biomedical research. So I describe sort of the poignancy of reading this, learning this about David, is that wow, if I could have combined in my academic life in medical school, if I could have connected with these researchers with my sort of much more instinctive, experiential, visceral Zen training, that would have been a wild ride. That would have been great fun because I could speak to the experience, the sensation of something that others would know how to measure. Now, the downside of that is that I might have stayed in academic medicine and I never would have had the balls to say, screw that. I'm moving to Wisconsin and I don't have a job, but we're going to make a dojo and we're going to train. So I have no regrets, but there's a poignancy that I'm to what I'm describing. But the point being is that we don't have to just sort of wave our hands as sort of airy-headed Buddhists talking about human connection. It's like you can draw upon people like Dave Rakel to lead you into the research that says, you know what, this is just fundamentally true. This is just the fundamentals of the human organism, that it's wired into others. And that what gets in the way of that is just basically your own crap. That's why it doesn't feel like it's the most natural thing in the world, the way I'm describing compassion. So that's a load. At some point, I'd like this to become more coherent, because as I said, I'm dishing out fragments of thought that have really moved me these last several months, and I don't know where to go with them yet, other than that they speak to facing suffering in a really related but different way than simply focus on your exhalations and use of gravity in your body. It speaks to the communal nature of us, the ways in which I've seen in many of us over these last many months of what the hell is going on in this world around us, that there is kind of this deeper sense of gathering. There is this deeper sense of I want to be with people. I want to heal this break with a member of my family. I want to spend more time with friends. I want to feel into my friends' experiences. I want to hear my friends' experiences. I want to read about others' lives. I want to read about the life of a Native Alaskan. I want to read about the life of a woman who's profoundly deaf, but who's profoundly articulate. So I'm going to stop because I'd love to know. I'm opening up my screen a little bit. What if anything, out of this barrage got triggered in you? We've got about 30 minutes, I think, that we can still be together. Yeah. What do you got? What do you got? Yes, Heather.
I am so with you. Like, I feel like we are so connected right now. Like, every single thing you talked about, with one exception, I literally, I just gave the Sesshin Teishos a month ago, which you didn't participate in. And I feel like I was channeling the same exact things. Like, I even built into my teaching correct curriculum connection, like as another stool leg. And I talked about the science of connection in the same way that you did. And I think that it's one of those implicit things that's so essential to Zen training. Like it's the last line of our canon to know the unknown. Yeah, it's the same thing. So how do you feel into that? It's such an it's so essential to group training, and sesshin, that awareness of others, the things you can't see, the threads that connect us. How do you feel into that? Um, the mono no aware thing, I I lived in Japan. I did study abroad in college, and I remember being obsessed with this phrase. I learned about it. I want to go back to it and read the things I was reading then, but the kinds of contexts, I don't have the definition anymore, but I remember about it. I remember it in certain key situations. One would be like an example would be the enjoyment of cherry blossoms. You sit under the cherry blossoms and they fall. Another one that I remember more concretely that came to me before that one was in the context of World War II. The Japanese were bombed with nuclear weapons. And my teacher was talking, I think maybe he even had gone into Japan right after this had happened to help people. And he said there was no blame or resentment at all. And the way he explained it was with this concept of mono no aware. It was sort of like things happen. There was no blame attached to the things that had happened. Yeah. And the connection I made in myself as you were talking was that it was to another thing you said about focusing on the problem rather than the vision we want to create. Um, the question I've had for myself over the past year since all this craziness has been going on is why do I have no vision of what's beyond this? Why can't I get beyond that? I can't see any future. And it's something, it's a key teaching of Valerian. It's a key teaching of Norma Wong Roshi's native Hawaiian, who I listen to. And the the question that came to me through this other podcast I listened to, Team Human, which is where I got the part about connection and the human body and all this kind of stuff. The question that came out of one of those podcasts was about fascism and asking the question about where fascism resides in our cells. Where's the part of our cells that's looking backwards and trying to bring something from the past forward that doesn't belong here today. And when I did that, I realized, oh, yes, like that's my problem. My problem isn't that I have limited vision, like it's only this far in front of me. My problem is that I'm stuck in the past. And it's connected to this concept of mono no aware, right? I'm not grounded in the impermanence of things, the impermanence of the moment. It's like I'm hanging on to what I've lost. I'm, and somehow that's related to blaming people. Like once I let go of hanging on to whatever that I've lost, that everything that I've lost, if I let go of that, I'm not angry about who's doing that to me. I'm not in my victimhood. You know what I mean? My agency is restored. I can do the things I need to do, and all of a sudden I can be focused on the positive thing that I want to create in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I put Alarian's book link in the chat if folks want to take you up on your recommendation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No, it's. I guess the question that comes to mind is, how's your right knee doing? Um, Other folks, what got what came to the surface for you from these fragments? That yeah, Cynthia. Good. Yeah, Kelly. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Dennis. Yeah, I like we're sort of expanding the vocabulary. I introduced some vocabulary, but I'm hearing new ways of expressing similar thoughts. I have a love-hate thing going on with online events. Too many Zoom meetings in my life. That I don't find them as, I mean, they're so damn convenient, but it's not quite the same human connection. But one thing I recognized this morning as I was sitting zazen getting ready for this was that one thing that is very, I think, compatible with our training is this idea of looking at yourself. So I'm looking at myself right now on the screen. So where am I? Who am I? um, we walk around with sort of this embodied package. We are the self-contained unit of action in the universe. We hear things, feel things, smell things, but actually in this setting, I don't know where I am, and I think I find that much healthier uh, than the opposite.
Yeah, thank you very much. I joined late and find it very, very helpful. The thing that rang my bell was a statement that you made earlier, and that which Edwin just reiterated, was that we are naturally compassionate, provided we can get rid of the crap. Now, realistically, we cannot get rid of the crap, but we have to see through the crap. And what allows us to do that is samadhi.
Yeah.
And basically, it comes back to Tanoi again. He says, your weapon in Zen training is samadhi. Without samadhi, you don't have a chance.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's when I read the Native Alaskan book, it was the power of his samadhi
Yeah.
is a thing. It just blew me away.
Yeah.
How can a human being have that kind of
Yeah.
samadhi?
Yeah.
And to me, that's the key. That's why he is the way he is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Samadhi allowed his natural compassion to be uncovered.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so simple.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're talking, it's like here he is. He's writing in English, which is a second language for him, and he's writing sort of in a Western context by which one organizes your thoughts into chapters and you try to explain things. And yet, when he's describing his childhood experiences, you can't fake it. It just, he's not talking about something. At the moment he's writing, he is that something. And that to me is the test of genuine samadhi, is that if it's present as you're expressing yourself, that's life. That's life.
And I remember years ago you mentioned how hunting can develop samadhi,
Yeah.
and what he went through. That's to me. The hunting played a very large role in his deep samadhi.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, guys. Um, we'll close, but reluctantly, because I'm just enjoying this time with you all, this kind of sharing, this kind of gathering. Let's do it again. Carry on. Make every relationship therapeutic, because what you're doing is you're healing duality in every encounter, and that's to me is our best gift in terms of easing suffering. You heal duality, you are easing suffering, and that's available every moment. And that's why, to quote my friend Honda Roshi, training is lifelong. It's a never-ending path that every relationship can be therapeutic.